any announcements? Okay. Daniel Krim. Not here. Jen Holmes here. Kevin Hayes. Estelle Hollander here. Kai Kelly. Sam Meyer, I'm here. Valerie Hyatt. Yeah. And from the city of Carlton. And Martin. I'm here.
Chris was on. This was online.
Awesome. Christopher and
I'm also Erling. I'm the associate planner in comprehensive planning.
awesome. Welcome. Yeah. All right. This time for real. Announcements from me. Not seeing any VAC announcements. Do we have public announcements or comments? Seeing any members of the public, we can move to new business for the regional plan. Are you leading this, Martin, or am I? Great. Cool. Did everyone have a chance to at least look at part of the regional plan, or what has everyone been able to do?
I looked at the, like, primarily the transportation chapter.
Cool.
And some other parts. Yeah.
I read the first 70 pages word for word and then skimmed the transportation chapter because obviously I ran out of time.
Yep.
It's snowing 32.
Good. Daniel, you can take over for me. I started the meeting. No.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, you're good.
Do you ever like, oh, I've got enough time to make this phone call? And then, yeah, I was on the phone with Chris from your records department. Yeah, a little longer than I thought.
So we just got to the one in agenda.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
We just got to the regional plan, which is the heart of the agenda. I can lead it or you can lead it.
Started it, you finish it.
Thanks. Okay. How would we like to review it? Would you like to start with the transportation chapter? Would you like to start with both policies, general, that? What would people like to do?
I brought some notes.
Valerie.
Someone remind me, I couldn't find the website where she said you could click it up. How do
I
I
can
get?
send it to you right now.
Okay, yes.
Or maybe someone else can do it quicker. I also can just Google, like,
It's in the right place, but I just.
You do have to sign in to comment if you're commenting.
Yeah. 'Cause I
Look on the.
make me look really stupid.
Yeah. There we go.
Because I was just typing up my Google Docs. All right, proceed.
Does anyone have an opinion about where you want to start?
I brought a little bit of notes.
Okay, let's start with general feedback and I'll take notes. General thoughts, who wants to go first?
I mean, I have notes too, but like general thoughts, I was really excited to see that connectivity was one of the primary themes in the transportation chapter, and like the concept of the big shift also.
Do you want to read any of your notes?
Do you want me to go through them?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, there's the different sections. In section 6-1, they talk about an undesignated shoulder as like a bike lane. I think that's the same thing with my understanding. And I just didn't know if there was any minimum acceptable width for an undesignated shoulder. So it's just a question. And I think that theme goes on, that there's lots of things discussed, but I didn't know if there were standards for lots of the concepts discussed. Yeah, so it's kind of theme that I touch on in a few different sections. Keep going.
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Section 6.2 talks about narrower roads. And I just put like a big yes by narrow. I just recently experienced how that works. I spent 6 weeks living in Spain, and there's so many, like outside of Girona, there's all these tiny roads, and it just served as traffic calming itself. Without any, like bike infrastructure there. It was amazing. 6-3, we talked there it talks about the grade streets a little bit, and I wasn't sure what the definition of grade streets was. And it also talks about primary bikeways, and I know that in the bikeways plan, there's the primary, secondary, and tertiary bikeways. And I couldn't remember what it's kind of, if you look at the map, it makes sense, but I'm not exactly sure what the definition of primary, secondary, and tertiary was there. And if a primary is the same as a grade street, there's a lot of overlap between primary bikeways and grade streets, but it's not 100% the same.
I agree. Yeah, I went straight from like great lead.
But just take notes, what will these look like? Is there going to be a standard or a minimum standard?
The bikeways or the grade streets?
Either or, I wasn't sure. Yeah. And then what are the attributes of a grade street? I don't have that much more to say.
So, just make sure I got this, what they would look like in terms of like design standards.
Yes.
Okay.
Section 6.3. Yes, to enhance grade separated crossings. I think that's part of the bikeways plan too. But I also thought that in order for them to be effective, they also have to be convenient. So safety and convenience, because if they're not convenient to use, they're not.
So convenient, for example, like in timing.
Yeah.
So you could get the signal in a reasonable time.
Yes. Yeah. I just didn't see that language there.
Yep.
6.13 and 6.14. So they spoke to engineering standards. I think there was a specific engineering standard that they were referring to. And that was in reference to roads and calming. But I just didn't know if there were any standards. It didn't seem like they were mentioning any standards. This theme again for bike infrastructure. That's going back to that. And then I made a note there to define what is safe. Everyone may have a different definition for what safe is.
And that was in both of those sections.
Yeah.
too.
And then continuing in 6.13, they were talking about safety quite a bit. And I feel like a big component of safety, there needs to be an educational component. And just a quick example would be, signage. Like this road is intended to be shared. Does Arizona have a 3-foot law for bikes?
Yes.
Okay, like signs for that too, just to educate motorists. And then signs for bikes can use full lane. And I feel like these are a lot of, this big shift is a new concept for a lot of people. And it's just going to be, it's new. So people are going to need to have that educational component to understand how to use these multimodal roadways. That's the terminology. And that's basically it. Although in 6.14, I made a note that a repeated barrier that was mentioned is the infrastructure to new developments, especially ones away from town. I think they mentioned impact fees, but maybe potentially having developers pay impact fees to help pay for that infrastructure to connect those new developments to the multimodal network of the city. I've seen that in other places.
Definitely want to comment on some of what Jen said, or do you want to start with your own comments?
Mine are kind of very
Go
similar
for
to
it.
hers. But good job.
Yeah.
Very thorough.
What you got?
I love the fact that is it 6.3 that has the that references the actual bikeways map. That's right.
I think chapter 3 had the bikeways map, but in chapter 6, they referred to the bikeways.
Yeah, I love the fact that they incorporate that into the document. I like to call that Martin's. Oh, they're all Martin's maps, but especially that one. I love that one. And I love the fact that it's in the regional plan. I think that wherever it talks about bicycle infrastructure and it talks about things like, for example, in 4-22, it says neighborhoods must improve bicycle infrastructure in and between neighborhoods. I think everywhere it talks about the bicycle infrastructure, it needs to say that it also needs to tie into Martin's map and be part of the connected system.
Section 4.2, that's in a different section.
4-22, it says that neighborhoods must improve bicycle infrastructure in and between neighborhoods, but all of them in section 4 have like what urban centers should do and what corridors should do and what suburban corridors should do and what urban neighborhoods should do and what suburban neighborhoods should do. But I think in all those places it should say and tie into the network.
You reference that section.
-2.
4-22, I think.
2.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But that's just like an anecdote. That's just like one of the examples of where it says, here's what this type of landscape should have. But then it should also say, and it should tie into the bikeways map at some point. And I picked up on that same thing. There was nothing really about signage, like an overarching signage for our interconnected network of bikeways.
Did you have more, Dan?
No.
Start working on stuff.
Yeah, I can go on it pretty quick.
Yeah.
And did have to look at this for work, so we provided a lot of comments through there months ago. So, but did give it kind of a fresh look, and I guess had a question, or kind of just wanted to like have us ponder on this for a minute. So the transportation goal is, just want to make sure like this is sufficient. So create an inclusive,
From the goal section.
from the goal section, sorry.
What?
So yeah,
Agree.
Section 3? Okay.
section, yeah, 6-13, so the transportation goal. Because really these goals and policies are like the bread and butter, like that's what people will go back to. So like we need to, I guess, make sure these are good. So create an inclusive, safe, comprehensive, and continuous transportation system that provides access, mobility, and efficient transportation options. I think that's good. I guess just kind of saying out loud, I want to make sure that like that does move the needle on where we want to get to. And I feel like efficient transportation options, the fact that there's options, like, yeah, bike is included, like car, like if it didn't have options in there, then efficient transportation, you could argue like right now that is cars, like it's always faster typically right now to drive somewhere than like bike or take the bus, for the most part, so. Not necessarily a comment, I guess just wanted to make sure like we're all good with that. Okay, so then moving on. The multimodal goal, I noticed there's nothing about bike parking anywhere. This is the goal and multimodal transportation. And I think it would probably fit under the implementing department staff should, or somewhere, just bike parking as image. I know we've talked a lot as a group about bike parking. With that.
Okay, so
Maybe I missed it.
between goals and policies. Because like in goal, it doesn't have bike parking, but under policy, multimodal transportation 1, it does say infrastructure. So is adding in bike parking, and it does have bike facilities
Okay, maybe I'm looking.
under the policy. But could we spell out specifically bike parking? This is in chapter 3, not chapter 6.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's two,
Okay.
which is one of the, I think,
Gotcha. Okay, I was looking at the
Yeah.
transportation section.
So are the goals and policies
That'd be a
listed
general
just on
comment.
Although it does.
chapter 3,
For
but
this
not
first
either
one.
chapter 6?
Yeah, so the way it's divided up is the goals and policies are in chapter 3, and that's because that's the part that applies to development cases for the city. So they're separated out from the implementation guidelines, which are shoulds, but not, are less sort of legally binding. So that's why they're organized that way, and to avoid too much repetition, the goals are repeated in the chapter, but not the policies. But that's certainly something that if you have if you as the commission feel it's unclear or needs to be organized differently, that's certainly something that we would take into account, so.
Infrastructure, I mean, I think in general, I agree, like bike parking is, I don't know if bike parking is always considered, thought of as infrastructure. Or. Yeah. I feel like we talk a lot about bike parking. Making sure, which is rightfully so. So something, or maybe it's increasing or updating, the development standards, making sure that bike parking is required, maybe that is already, it's kind of like retrofitting areas. Like bike parking needs to be mentioned a bit more.
It wasn't in some of the diagrams.
Okay, okay, then maybe I just missed it.
Well, no, it's
it's
not
not
really,
explicit.
yeah, it's not explicit, but it's in like, here's what it looks like now and here's what it could look like. Like, bike racks and stuff.
I think to like her covered bike parking, like racks are great, racks are efficient, but other methods of bike parking would be good too. So I think it would be worth potentially adding some specific language about parking for storage infrastructure. Also thinking about other kinds of devices, like on campus, for example, and I'm sure you've seen this around town. People aren't just locking up bikes to racks, they're locking up scooters, they're locking up all kinds of stuff. And depending on the device, different kinds of storage facilities are appropriate. So parking for storage facilities, maybe. Especially since we're trying to encourage some of those other devices too, and one of the policy goals. So you have something that they can be attached to.
So just to clarify, I got the multimodal goal and the policy. It's like, you think bike parking isn't specifically mentioned here, but you may count it under either infrastructure or facilities.
It's just funny that first policy is like including the foots, like that really like calls out foots and trails. So it's like, I feel like parking could easily get missed under infrastructure. Increase the ability, connectivity and use of the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. To me, that I think of trails as like connectivity. Is availability, you could argue that's parking. Including the foots and other trail systems as a element for a state and the whole. It just, to me, I don't read parking when I read that goal. I think of like connections to transit.
Did you get the difference between the chapter 3, the goals and policies, or something that would refer to new development that it needs to, entitlement has to demonstrate compliance with the regional plan, and we check these policies. Whereas the implementation guidelines that are described in chapter 6 of the transportation are more what the city need to do.
Right.
So think of it from that perspective. It could be like parking in public cases.
Yeah, definitely. I can see the implementation guidelines. Because I don't think there was anything there about bike parking. I don't know, Mark. I mean, when you hear infrastructure, do you think parking? I think the staff were to carry this out. Yeah.
I just think it's.
I think bike
yeah,
lanes and like, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's more. Okay.
I think it's a very, very general term. I think looking at bike parking in terms of whether or not an entitlement case is complying with the original plan is less meaningful to me than having fully developed standards that describe how much required.
Would you scope this document, I'm assuming, or would that be in a
I think we can suggest putting it in sort of the implementation guidelines. And I like kind of broadening the definition of like what we described to include like long-term floor workplaces or.
Yeah, I was,
And we don't really have code. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go
address
ahead.
Either of those things really.
that was the question is, obviously this is one kind of policy document at a certain level, but there would need to be other changes, I would assume, for other sort of clarifications, code development, things like that.
Yeah. So what might happen is if it were included in the regional plan, it would have an implementing strategy. It talks about, we just talked about in reference to white parking. And as a follow up, we'd have to actually change the code to include those things, but have support, guidance. Go get them from the regional.
Yeah, then I think it's worth, personally, I think it's worth calling out like storage or parking specifically, especially if you're thinking of a transportation system, because as a person who predominantly bicycles for like living my life and not for recreation. For example, like the other week I biked to the Safeway on Cedar. They've got one bike rack there and it was full. Right, like there is generally in the city, we've talked about this along the VAC, I won't belabor the point, but there's not parking at like critical facilities that fit bikes. And if there is parking, it's like pretty minimal. That Safeway Cedar, I think, has a rack that can fit like 6 bikes. And it's been full increasingly when I've been there because there's more and more e-bikes and scooters locked up to it. So just in terms of thinking about a transit system, I think parking is absolutely part of that. If you're expecting people to take their bike to a location to carry out like a core function, like grocery shopping.
And that's the goal.
Yeah,
Isn't there
the
a
goal.
percentage? goal?
Yes,
Yeah.
if that's the goal, then I think it should be included. That's my opinion. And I think also including it could be like a very small language change, just to talk about, like, you could change the language in a couple of these in either chapter 6 or chapter 3 or both, if appropriate, to make like a couple tweaks. And I think it would get there. If it's sort of implicit in the document, I feel like it could be brought out more explicitly.
So maybe some indication.
Yes,
Original one.
correct.
End of trip facilities, did you? just
Yeah, I
call
like
it
that.
I did not. It's somebody else.
Really good. Really good.
We're making it our own.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, because if you can just like stay on your bike the whole time, that's awesome and great. But eventually, you're probably trying to get somewhere again if you're thinking about being a bicyclist as a commuter, not as like recreational or trail use.
Those are great. Valerie.
Okay, so I guess mine is also focused kind of on like the goals level. There is one specific transit goal, and I feel like it could be a little bit stronger tying in the idea that you can ride your bus to the bike, take your ride your bike to the bus, put your bike on the bus, and get to where you need to go. And I do think that should be a big piece of connecting transportation and also recreation, that we want to be encouraging people to take their mountain bike via the bus to trailheads or whatever. That's my thoughts.
Do you know where were you thinking that might go?
Under policy TR1, just something about interconnectivity between the transit system and other multimodal, or could you fold transit under multimodal because it is another mode? I don't want to like redo the entire whole situation, but I feel like there is some redundancy by saying, well, we want to promote the bus in addition to biking.
There is, maybe it could fit under this MT1 policy, or at least it is increase the availability, connectivity, and use of pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, including the bus stop trails as a critical element of a safe and livable community and to promote transit access. I mean, it's kind of a clunky, but it at least talks about ped and bike infrastructure to promote transit access. Yeah. Out the middle bit. Like that's the purpose for what this policy is trying to get to.
I have a general question, which is something I thought about while reading all of this, in that there's a lot of policies or goals that mention increasing or improving. Is there anything, or is there a place in this plan to talk about collecting data for current use? Do we have current use information that would allow us to know whether or not we've improved? Because I was looking at the very end, there's some mention about how the regional plan success will be assessed on these goals. And I think for bike and ped, let me go to this chapter. It's in like chapter 11 at the very end. It's just reporting about like new things that were constructed or retrofitted, which is great and awesome, but that doesn't speak to use. And it doesn't allow you to say that people are using the thing more. I feel like this has also come up in the BAC that it is a good and wonderful thing to be like, hey, we added a bike rack or we painted a stripe here, but it is not the same thing of, and now we have a 20% increase in ridership in this particular lane. And I didn't really see anything throughout the regional plan about, and maybe it's not appropriate, you know, tell me if I'm totally off base, but just about like what data collection is happening so you can do that kind of assessment or indicate that there has been improvement. Especially because a lot of the bike stuff in this plan talks about improvement. Again, because you have to know how it's currently being used in order to demonstrate that you improved. Yeah, so that's something that I sort of saw throughout the plan. I agree with what you said, Jen, about defining safe, whether or not that needs to be defined in this plan or could be defined in a different accessory plan, but something about like, what do you mean by safe? There's one very specific goal and policy in chapter 3 about vision zero. So, you know, no serious fatalities and injuries. Is that the only metric of safety? I feel like we've talked a lot in the BAC about comfortability versus safety too. And I don't recall seeing a lot about comfortability in this plan, or not that term. Accessibility, there was one part that said something about to make infrastructure appealing. And I think that's really wimpy as far as language goes. I mean, appealing's great, but like use is what we want. I don't know. To me, I didn't love that phrasing. Because again, appealing is not really, this would be a beautiful bike. It was in the transportation system section of chapter 3. That's my opinion, is appealing doesn't mean that people are using it. It can look great, but if people aren't using it, that's not really the point. It could be painted a nice green color. And then something we've talked about too is, Martin, can you go to policy transportation system 1? I think it's just up, yeah. So I, of course, want to prioritize the safety and protection. How does this prioritization happen? Like what data are we using? Are we just using accident data? Again, maybe it's beyond the scope of this document, but looking at this, you know, what do you mean by protection? Is it they don't get killed by a car? Is it, what does that mean? And then policy TS5, roadway classification. I feel like we talked about this recently too, or maybe I was talking to someone else about this, about whether or not the classification of like arterial, et cetera, is really meaningful for bikes. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. In terms of like how bikes are using those same roadways, like, correct me if I'm wrong. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking at you, Carlton and Martin. But the roadway classifications are just about like traffic flow for vehicles, right? Like how they're determined mostly about that, or does it take into account other road users? How do you classify a roadway?
I'd say mostly cars, yeah.
It's mostly cars, right? It's not thinking about what function does the road serve for other users.
Generally not. The functional class is the function for vehicle trips.
Okay.
Generally. We invented our own functional class, which is the secondary and tertiary.
Okay. Is that meant to be implied in this section? Because to me, it's not. And then it puts us kind of back at like the conversations we've had about level of service. Like this particular policy, TS5, I felt like could say something about multimodal transit that it's not to me currently, because roadway classification is just about vehicles, as defined it. Land use context to me also doesn't scream other modes of transit. I don't know. That to me seemed to be sort of not as focused on multimodal as some of the other transportation system policies.
Sorry, we're just on.
Please
that.
go ahead.
I also read that we're designing and building our transportation infrastructure like to that roadway classification. But it almost should be the opposite. Like we need to improve our, like, so if it's an arterial and we like, that may mean that we can't fit bike lane, or bikes shouldn't be there because it's a highway road, you know, even just taking Humphreys, which is technically a highway, according to the state classification, right? And so therefore bike lanes aren't required or wanted. You know what I'm trying to say? Like it almost needs to be the opposite, where like
Yeah.
we're building our infrastructure based on more actually like maybe the land use context where it's looking, you know, that it's in a downtown, or we want people to bike there. And so, yeah, I'm not very eloquent tonight, but.
Make perfect sense. So I think that's all, of course, this is all very general. So it'll be subject to interpretation, and how it gets implemented really is going to be what makes a difference in the future. But there was something in the ATMP that was very similar to this, except it didn't refer to roadway classification. And there's a bit of this where roadway classification and context are two sort of opposite tendencies in what road design looks like. So if you're doing road design by context, then you could have a road that serves an arterial, where that arterial goes through a suburban area. It can look differently. It can function differently than when it goes through an urban area. If that makes any sense. So like think of in a rural area, it can be a highway. In a suburban area, it could be you know, a wide, fast road. In an urban area, it could be a downtown street. All serves the function of being an arterial, but its design is responding to the context, not different aspects of function, powers, or keeping it consistent. Does that make sense? Whereas now, if we had one standard for arterials, that arterial looks the same no matter where it is. So it's in a rural area, it looks the same as when it goes through down the downtown area. A lot of cases that's inappropriate. Like we don't want that. We want road to look differently when it goes through the downtown area. And I think it's really kind of the same for multimodal. So if you think of multimodal as part of the context, is this a primary bike way? Is this a heavily used walking corridors, or sort of foot market? That context will influence how it's designed. That makes sense. I think that's what you said essentially.
Right, and this is it. Is that how that's written? Like what you just said? That's appropriate.
I think in some ways this isn't appropriate for the roadway classification and the land use context. And it's almost like you have to pick one or the other. You can't. It's two different approaches to how
Right.
to roadway design.
That's why I didn't like it.
Don't combine.
Right, I feel like they're gonna compete.
Right.
Just trying to reduce that, like, I feel like where our current regional plan is where it says like accommodate bikes, promote bikes, like, I think, like, it's not strong language, so then the car always wins. Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to reduce those conflicts, or it's very clear I don't think the word prioritize is in here, but we're prioritizing bikes and pets.
That's
CS
also,
one says prioritize.
but it just says safety and protection.
Yeah.
It doesn't say,
That is, If I understand, that is where that's getting at, is, but usually you'll build from the center out and then you run out of room. You're out of right of way. Well, we'll just chop the sidewalks didn't make the cut this
Yeah.
time, that kind of idea. I think that's what that's getting at, but it's, doesn't feel clear enough based on just what I'm hearing from you guys, so let's make that comment.
How about this, if TS5 referenced roadway classification, land use context, and multimodal function.
I think that would help. Just, yeah. Especially because I feel like there's just some, to my mind anyway, some things here that are mentioned elsewhere, but that aren't very clear in this specific policy about promoting other types of road users. Again, like safety and protection is awesome. Safety and protection is not the same as increasing the number of people who are not driving. You know, it's not the same as accessibility, comfort, you know, they're just not the same. And I feel like there's an implication, for example, in TS6 that reduce the demand for driving. That's going to happen if you can get people to use other methods of transportation, but it's just not super explicit to me in this language.
On TS5, mostly, still, or
Yeah.
on all of them.
On all of them, I feel like it could be better, just more clearer, more explicit. There were a couple other things too.
For, I think some interesting context on that for TS5 is if you have the roadway classification in there, if that's how the design of the area starts,
Right,
it starts with a design speed.
right.
So you've already shot yourself in the foot for
Exactly.
multimodal because you said, well, this is an arterial, so therefore it has to be 45 miles an hour. So that's step one, is we make it so cars can go really fast. Yeah. So
Yeah.
And everything else falls into place.
Right. And then it's fine. Right, and actually, now that you mention it, speed is another one that I didn't really see throughout this plan. I did not, I will check again because it's been a couple weeks since I read it, but I feel like there's not a lot of discussion about street speed and how that relates to safety as well as comfort and speed limits. Thinking about recent discussions we had about setting speed limits to think about non-driving road users. I think I said this already, but in the development patterns section of the goals and policies, multiple subcomponents address safe and convenient infrastructure. And I just would like to know, how do you assess safe and convenient? Who is responsible for assessing it? What makes something convenient? And if that's not in this plan, which plan would it be in? Like, to me, a lot of the language in this plan I thought was helpful and supports the ideas we've been talking about, but it was very vague. And that could be because this is intentionally, you know, top level policy document, and I understand that. So if it has to stay vague, that's cool. But also I'd like to know which plans and documents are going to have the more specific answers to some of these questions. Let's say something to that if you like.
Just on a short rant about safety and comfort.
Okay.
I think, you know, people often reference safety when you ask them what's the issue with riding a bike or walking, they reference safety. Generally, they mean comfort. Safety is like a very specific thing. I think if we took it literally and said that our goal is safety, and what we're literally saying is that our goal is survivability, I think we're shooting for a higher standard than that. So I think to the extent that we can define these things later on, like I think the problem with just saying safety would be later on, we look at just crashes and see that there's not a crash history,
Yes.
determine that there's not a problem. So it's safe. That doesn't mean it's functional, comfortable, appealing, or
Right.
easy.
And that's why, like, that's, again, one of the things about, you know, some of the policies or the implementation talks about improvement, but I don't know if we have a baseline of information about current use for non-vehicle users that would allow us to demonstrate improvement. And so to me, part of implementing this, maybe it belongs in one of the implementation sections, is saying gather data about current use of the existing system by bikes and peds and other devices, so that you can demonstrate improvement or know the things that you're changing, you know, create improvement, and sort of giving support to city staff to be able to do that data collection, saying like, actually, we shouldn't just be looking at like, where did we paint a stripe? It's great that you paint stripes. I'm happy about the stripe. Go ahead, I'm just rambling.
No, there's one, I noticed that word improve showed up a lot, and I'll pick on 4-22 again, just because it's one of the only places where you use the word must. But it says that neighborhoods must improve bicycle infrastructure in and between neighborhoods. I think everywhere where we talk about improve, we should talk about also adding new bicycle infrastructure that again goes towards having that whole connected infrastructure, because if all you do is improve the existing infrastructure and you don't build any new infrastructure, you're still gonna have all those gaps.
Another thing that I saw, and maybe it's in a section that I didn't read closely, but that I just wanted to bring up, is that very occasionally there's language that seems to talk about other road users who might, that I think are getting grouped under pedestrians, which would be like people using assistive devices, like wheelchairs or other things like that. Like I think in chapter 6, there's like 1 or 2 mentions of, that I read as potentially referring to people using assistive devices. Or they're talking about people who roller skate, I'm not sure.
Like a walker or.
Walk or roll, yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, what does that, because it's the only time it shows up versus
Or
that I
wheelchair.
recall. Yeah, because I was like, is this a wheelchair user? Is this like, yeah, roller skater?
Let's,
Those are my
Yeah,
two.
that's like
let's say,
I caught that.
those shoes that you hit. Let's make a point, CMC means something. Including, bring it up. Inclusion adaptive living means that we can have them clarify. I think to me, wheelchair users are pedestrians.
Right, I've seen it honestly both ways, where now people are wanting to say the roll, like walk, roll,
More inclusive.
more inclusive, but I agree, does that include roller skates? I don't know. But I've seen it,
Scooters.
I agree, like, where I think of a pedestrian as someone also in a wheelchair. But I've seen now the term of roll being used more. That's, or go on a walk or roll. Yeah.
But like, even if you could just say that somewhere to be like pedestrians includes people who are using assistive devices
Right.
and sidewalks, like that would be helpful just to clarify. Because this came up in some of the conversations we've had about, for example, crossings, right? Like how long does it take someone to get through a crossing? If you was, based on the number of categories, physical ability being one of them. So if that's not somewhere in here and I didn't see it, I think that would be helpful to even just have like a little call out section to just explain. We're looking at, in the category of pedestrian or in a definition, I don't care, just somewhere to talk about, like when we're talking about pedestrians, we're also talking about people using certain kinds of devices and their needs are taken into account. That's another comment I had.
Sorry, just on that thread, like, I'm curious, just TS1, like, was vulnerable road users was that the intent, or why not just pedestrians and bicyclists to be more clear? Like, with the, I don't
Yeah, I would
Like,
agree with that.
or
Multimodal use.
yeah, just,
Is it in the definitions of both vulnerable user?
I don't, let me look.
I just think again, like, less jargony and just, I don't know, pedestrian, bicyclist, or just vulnerable road user, I don't know.
Or even like comma including
Yeah.
the bicyclists.
Is there an emotional component to that?
Like, am I vulnerable that I'm on a cyclist? I mean, yes, technically, but our infrastructure wouldn't feel vulnerable. I don't know. I'm just curious if that was very deliberate to pick those words compared to pedestrian.
It's not in the glossary, just as a note. So it's not defined.
No, I guess personally, I'd rather see pedestrian and bicyclist because this could be interpreted maybe that way.
One comment on vulnerable road users, would be the micromobility users, if they can kind of be included in vulnerable road users, but it might be forgotten if we say pedestrian and bicyclist. That we would also be referring to like someone on an electric skateboard or something. But
That pops up, I think, actually throughout chapter 6 on my read, is that like it's clearly intended to apply to multimodal users. There is, I think, a call out somewhere in chapter 6 for like other devices, but the language does mostly say pedestrian and cyclist. It doesn't really refer to other users. And I know, for instance, at NAU, when they were working on their policy, it's partially because there's not a good legal term for those people. It sounded bad when I said those people, but there's not a good term for under, kind of legal standards for what you are if you're using a wide variety of micromobility devices. No one knows what to call you. I think at NAU we wound up using something like device user, and that's like really funky and terrible. So, yeah, it wasn't a good, we might have gotten rid of that too, but for a while, that's what it was. So then
So device
like,
user, like I think that's like a cell phone.
Yeah.
right, that's why it wasn't very good. Like up top, it was a much shorter document too, so it defined them, but yeah, because I think correct me if I'm wrong, under like city code, people using stand-up scooters are considered bicyclists, sort of. They can use bicycle infrastructure. Get rid of traffic.
Everyone's category, so it depends.
Want me to chime in on that? So under state law, if you're on a scooter, you are bound by the same laws as cyclists.
And I think though, they're prohibited on all sidewalks, city. Yeah, not just downtown.
That feels like motorized unicycle skateboard things. They also bicyclists.
As I say, it's kind of like a scooter, similar, but yeah, I'd have to dig deeper into that. I don't know if those are actually defined in statute or not.
I tried to look into this. I don't think they are, but I could be wrong. I'm not an expert. Someone asked me a question that I was like, I don't know. I'll Google it.
It's essentially a skateboard, right? It's not really, skateboarders are technically considered pedestrians.
Are roller skaters also considered?
But scooters are quite.
So I'll pull this down here. But yes, you do.
And you're talking about electric scooters,
Um,
not the manual push scooter.
I'll tell you. Just
Not the razor.
Are you looking at 28?
I mean, all these rules don't really make sense the more you think about it.
Looking at this again, there is a term of micromobility users that I guess you could add here if you wanted to define vulnerable road users in chapter 6 as pedestrians, bicyclists, and micromobility users would cover, I think, everyone we're talking about. And might be a little
What's
clearer.
there's a catch-all term?
Well, it's just that in one of this, in chapter 6, right about transit, it says electric micromobility is an emerging component, and then it just uses the term micromobility users. But again, that's not really used throughout the document. It's sort of mentioned here and there, even though it's implied. that-
If we would like multimodal road user, I think that's a catch-all of.
Sure. I think anything can be, as long as it's defined somewhere. As currently written, it's mostly about pets and bikes. Another general comment that I think I said before the meeting formally started is I think that great streets is pretty vague, and its connection to complete streets or other terms using the word streets is confusing. If you're not, especially I think if you're not involved in this arena. Great streets is defined in the glossary. I can't remember if complete streets is or not, so now I will look.
That glossary is like Good job on that. That is useful.
But even the definition of good students was a big definition.
It's vague, but at least it has one. Can't recall. Road diet has one too, because I asked about that last time. Micromobility does as well. Pedestrian is not defined, so that might clarify some of the questions around things like that. Was there any handbook of complete streets? Complete streets is defined too. And bicyclist is also not defined. And I know it sounds very pedantic, but it might be helpful. Again, just thinking about.
Could include e-bikes, for example.
That's what I was thinking about. That's right. Does.
But not e-trucks.
Oh.
But I don't know. Okay, where do we? Another.
One other thing on the parks, recreation and open space, and I need to read that chapter again, but something that's come up in our discussions at the Foots, and that's interesting about the Foots, is that it is both recreational and commuter infrastructure, the way that it is used. And certain trails are obviously more one or the other. But I think that it's not mentioned much as I can recall, or if it's mentioned in the recreation section, parks, recreation and open space section, there's not as much mention of the aspects of the Foots that are more about commuting. And vice versa, speaking to whoever said something about us to bike, like the Foots is both, and different Foots trails have pretty different uses. I think what I was looking at my notes, what I was making a comment on was in chapter 3, the parks, recreation and open space suite of policies, goals and policies has the little transit icon, but then it doesn't mention that the Foots is used for active transportation, if I recall.
You said open space.
Yeah, parks, open space and something.
That's the chapter, not rather than the goals and policies.
Chapter 3, and then the header is parks, open, whatever. So chapter 16. Or 16, like. Also, in terms of parking, there is in chapter 3, there's a parking thing that also has a little multimodal icon. Does not mention anything about, or doesn't explicitly mention anything about parking for non-vehicles. I guess you could say it as applies. Yeah, so it has the little multimodal icon, but it doesn't actually say anything about like the Foots or the trail system and its uses for under the goals. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I guess.
At least not that I read, it doesn't really mention. Again, I think that may be because it doesn't need to, because of what you were explaining about looking at future development, but it doesn't mention it. Since we've talked about this too, and this is the last comment I'll make, and then I'll ask for stable things if I want to. we've talked a lot about like levels of service for vehicles and then how that creates problems for other road users, but also that there is not sort of a standard, there's not something comparable for vulnerable road users in terms of what's required to make this safe and comfortable. Would this document be an opportunity to say, to set like a level of service companion for non-vehicle road users? Could that happen?
I think that to do that successfully, there has to be a whole section that describes what we mean by level of service. That not again.
And I know that was excluded on purpose, right, for cars, is what we
Yeah.
all said last time, yeah.
It's pretty tightly defined columns. Really. It's been defined in different ways. The initial, I don't think this is valid anymore. The initial way we define it is how many pedestrians on the sidewalk there wants to close down. To try and apply the same concept of like roadways to the side. Just doesn't describe those.
So would this document be an appropriate place for that, or is that something that would be better defined in like the active transportation master plan?
I think the latter.
And what pedestrian is per state law. So a person who uses, for any person on foot or a person who uses an electric personal assistive mobility device or a manual or motorized wheelchair is considered a pedestrian. Unless the manual wheelchair qualifies as a bicycle. And the manual wheelchair qualifying as a bicycle has to be a racing wheelchair.
Oh. Wheelchairs have to use the bike, I guess. Sounds so, you can't sit on the sidewalk.
So, yeah. Bicycles.
The bicycle will be on the sidewalk. Or we think that's not logical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You're gonna have to like cross-reference a few places.
Right.
Trying to explain this to
So
the
28,
officer.
the very first thing, 28.1 has all the definitions. For the most part, some of the other sections have different definitions within the sections. See if I suppose. Bicycle means a device, including a racing wheelchair.
Well, there you go.
Well,
I mean, you don't need to whole thing, but it's just like.
That's what I
But
first
like-
did.
Including a
That's very
racing wheelchair
specific.
that is propelled by human power on which a person may ride, and that has either two tandem wheels, either of which is more than 16 inches in diameter, three wheels in contact with the ground, any of which is more than 16 inches in diameter. So it has to have two or three wheels, and they gotta be 60 inches.
So children's bikes are not bikes.
14-inch bikes.
Yeah.
Until they get to.
Curious.
Either of
Learn
them.
something.
Because they're not a pedestrian definition either.
Are we gonna define a driveway in this?
So Martin, I think what we had discussed was coming up with written comments, right, for you folks? Is that what we had discussed? Or that was an option available to us?
Before we move on, can I just ask for clarification on one thing that you brought up,
Yes,
which was that how do we measure things in the countries?
yes.
You asked for clarification from, is there a section there about targets or metrics or measuring? Anything like that, or is that left?
There's a like preliminary kind of list in the appendices. Appendix A, annual reporting, that's A1. Where we've identified 10 key regional plan metrics. I think someone read this earlier, and that the one that would apply for bicycles and pedestrians is Number 6, summary of bicycle, pedestrian, and transit improvements constructed or implemented. I think this list could be improved as the document evolves or added to. But yeah, at the moment, I don't know that we have specific metrics that we've listed out aside from that overall description.
Is that something that's intended to be part of the regional plan, or is that left to subsequent strategic plans or specific plans?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Carlton, you were there for doing the metrics of the last regional plan. And do you know how those were decided? I mean, I know there was some changing year to year of what was considered the best metrics, because it was kind of based on what data was available.
Yeah, what was there wasn't a clean one-to-one. It felt pretty detached from the goals and policies, actually. So what we would measure every year in the annual report. So, yeah, at the time I can think we need this, these should be very specific actions and tied to something measurable that then gets reported on annually to see if we're making progress. They weren't really tied to policy directly. I don't know where they all came from. Yeah, some of them evolved in like different units, kind of as what was available, but the idea of them, I don't know where they initially really came from.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in part because I think multiple previous plans, like city plans, the bikeways plans and other things, some of them have things you can assess, like did we fill in this chunk of sidewalk? Did we build this trail? Things like that. But so far as I know, and Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think use data has been a huge part of previous bicycle related plans, like assessing did the number of bicyclists using this trail increase, decrease. I don't think that's been something the city has done previously, right? It'd be great if we did.
This document did state, what the goals are for use, both for, like commuting to work. They wanted that to increase to a certain percentage. I forget what it was. And then people replacing their cars by using multimodal transportation by a certain percentage too. So that could be a metric, but I don't know how that's measured or. But they did have a baseline of where we are now.
In terms of trip, is that the venture plan trip? Where does that trip stuff come from? The sort of like estimating trips, is that venture plan stuff that Jen's referencing?
Yes, true document survey, also census, American Community Survey, journey to work, trip to work numbers.
Yeah, which those are like, they're helpful metrics, but they're not use metrics for existing trails or infrastructure the same way that we would have like traffic data, right? We've never had that. We had bike traffic data, that would be awesome. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, on trails, they have trail counters. I don't know if that could somehow.
Yeah. But trail counters would be great. I don't know if there's other options for like traffic monitoring. I know my understanding, I should say, you both should correct me, is that there've been like spot counts, right? Like that people will do.
I know that Adam Shimoni went out and personally counted when he put up the candlesticks. Didn't he do that for a few hours?
So two comments real quick. One is on the counts. Yes, we haven't really ever done anything in a comprehensive way. We're thinking of making that one of the things that the Safe Streets or Transportation Master Plan would do. Both in terms of getting us like an initial count through a consultant, as comprehensive as possible, and then kind of setting us up to be able to do it more on an ongoing basis with things technology is whatever it takes to do that. Because we don't have that data. We just start collecting that data. That's something that gets done in the future. Then two, if you look in the PTMP, there are some specific targets. That's where the reference to voucher share came in. So like for overall voucher share references are target going from the current 27% of trips to 54%, so doubling. So there are just a handful of very, very specific targets that are very specific and can be measured. There's also a list of things that are outcomes and more general use of those can be measured. Really, not really a commitment to actually collect that data, but kind of like a guide for how you could assess whether you're actually being successful in it. And it tries to do things like instead of, this would be a dumb example, but like instead of having a metric of add more bike parking, have more bike parking. You have more bike parking users, so more bike parking users. So instead of actually doing something that we hope leads to something good, that we're actually measuring. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So like instead of saying we're going to add bike lanes, our metric would be where people are cycling.
That's what I was thinking about, because again, I know it's come up repeatedly on the BAC that it's been difficult, for example, in conversations with traffic engineers to demonstrate conclusively and not anecdotally that a particular route is a high bike traffic route.
Yeah.
It's always anecdata, and which I can understand people wanting to. You can contest that very easily because there's no actual info or, right now I'm thinking about when we had all the conversations around the speed limit on Butler. One of the things the BAC said repeatedly is that lots of cyclists and pedestrians cross at the intersections that have been identified as like high accident sites, but that's really the only data we have. We don't have like crossing data, for example, that I'm aware of. And so that was a point of conflict when we were having that discussion, was trying to demonstrate lowering the speed would have a significant impact because of the number of people crossing here for whom you've now approved safety conditions, but we couldn't actually say that except by saying everyone knows that people are going down here, which is not compelling.
Those traffic tables, are they able to count bicycle? Can they tell the difference between a car and a bicycle on those speed tables?
Sometimes, generally, yes, but not universally.
Does it keep count of that stuff? Was it and also another speed?
I think the ones that can count bicycles can separate out bicycles from vehicles. Yeah. Everybody give their comments?
That was really good. Sam, thank you for that deep dive. You
Yeah.
definitely read it closer than any of us.
I said I would, so I did.
Did you read the whole thing?
No, I only skimmed, I skimmed it all, but I have not read, for example, water resource management yet, so if there's anything about bikes in there, I didn't catch it.
Should we do some like big picture positive things? We like how much the carbon neutrality plan was mentioned.
Yep.
We liked how much we talked about infill and density and how that helps all of these things. We like all that. We appreciate that they care about bikes and roller skaters. Right. That kind of thing. Those are
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's obviously like a big, big project. But
Yeah.
Thank you for all the hard work to you.
seriously. Another big picture though, is I felt like public safety, there was just the one goal about public safety and basically all it talked about was like emergency services being able to get somewhere. Is there something else that we need to include? I don't know, like. It talked about like more disaster resiliency, that kind of thing, but. I'd like-
Yes, I also have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would like the people to be safe. It's why the thing that needs to be discussed here, is that relevant to land? I don't know.
And I think maybe mentioning Vision Zero, because it is mentioned elsewhere, and that does relate to
Yeah.
land use for sure.
Yes. Also,
Yeah, just one note about the goals and policies in terms of like overlap areas is we're trying to cut down on the total number of goals and policies. So in cases where there was a topic that fit in 2 chapters, we generally just put it in one, to try to not have too many redundant ones. So, in terms of safety and Vision Zero, just because it is mentioned in transportation doesn't mean it's like not considered as in the document, but if there's another part that isn't covered in transportation that should be brought in, that I think would be a comment that would more fit with how we were thinking about when we were writing rules and policies, but
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
Healthcare access, I mean, I know like the hospital is still licking its wounds from election. But that was really gonna change a lot of use and like drive development towards Tuthill. And like beefing up Beulah was a part of that I feel like now we're missing out on. So I don't know if there is a missing piece of like, and the hospital hasn't told us where they want to build any more hospital yet, but like, has there, and this is not relevant to bikes directly, but I feel like, is that a missing piece of this? Has there been communication with the hospital? Because we do want the hospital to be interconnected as well, which is maybe how I'm gonna tie it back in, but, yeah, that's, I don't. Sure. You don't have to.
Yeah, what's the answer?
Can you restate the question?
What is the hospital going to do? Where are they going to build? Is it gonna be in Belmont? Is
How are
so
their
that's-
wounds?
Yeah. Can you single-handedly fix our healthcare system?
Yeah, is that in the regional plan?
Yeah.
Just make it a great setup.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think that the hospital would fit under the, what was it, research and university, that land use title, right? It says medical facilities. We could look at the land use map and see where that fits. Some of those are in Belmont. Right. And on the outskirts, not as bad as the employment districts. Those are definitely on the outskirts of town. But right, I mean, that's where a new hospital would fit under, would be that, I think it's called like research. I'd have to find it. You know what?
Yeah, the university research.
University research, but I think it said medical facilities falls under that.
Yes. So. Yeah.
It is interesting to look at the land use map. I don't know if you want to bring that up. Got that.
Finding an appropriate place for the hospital, as a person who bicycles to the hospital,
Right.
is very important. And getting people there is a significant transportation thing, because we have people coming in from all out of town all the time. So that's. I did like that there is a somewhere promoting employer housing next to employment, which I like that. That was one of the things the hospital was gonna do, was have some housing out at Town Hill. So I liked that that was there.
Some other closing thoughts, or do we want to talk about it?
Organize that, I thought, so maybe like major employment or destination centers should have interconnectivity to the multimodal network.
Yeah,
Is that kind of where you're,
right. Yeah.
get you towards where you're thinking?
Mhm. Which I think is kind of promoted, but I don't know if that needs to be explicitly spelled out, because the hospital issue is going to come up in the lifespan of this document. So does it need its own special call out? Does it need, compared to like employment district? Because it's different than like another just store.
Yeah, would it be employment district? I guess, wouldn't you want that to be the same, have the same connectivity too? Because different scale
Yeah.
would still be benefit. That same concept apply,
That's a reason.
so maybe we don't have to. I don't know.
The definition, because I've looked at this a lot, because the employment districts, in my opinion, are definitely causing sprawl. They're are like really in the middle of nowhere. And the definition is not clear of what an employment district is. It doesn't clarify medical facility. If anything, it's the research one that does talk about medical facilities. So I worry though, yeah, employment district by like, if you did put the hospital in that category, then I would have some concerns with how the land use map is right now. Because for example, the location by Foot Hill is clarified as an employment district. I think it's pretty clear from the vote that people don't want development there, but it's still clarified as. So,
Or it could be like
Yeah.
halfway out to Doty Park, like that would be terrible.
yeah, I mean, currently Cosmino is identified as an employment district. There's stuff all the way out in like Timberline, so.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
But the way employment district, that also could be like a cinder mill or whatever, not, that's not the right word, whatever, a cinder thing.
Cinder factory.
Or like lumber. Like stuff that does belong kind of in the middle of nowhere, but yeah, we shouldn't have a big, like a Purina, they're gonna ask for, they're gonna ask for public transit like they currently do if they're out. So I did bring this up in the, well, now I have brought it up in the meeting, but I wasn't going to because it doesn't have to do with bike paths directly, but.
Although it arguably does.
Yeah.
A major employment sector where people are likely to be biking.
Right.
But
But
yeah,
yeah,
and would you think, Valerie, to your point, like, for services that you need to support human health and safety should be bike or walking accessible, because you can, or transit accessible, but, you know, if you are thinking about building a transportation system where a person can feasibly walk or bike to fulfill all their core services, medical care is one of them, and it is currently difficult to get to certain, not necessarily the hospital, like, that's okay, but for example,
To get to the hospital
yeah,
from downtown.
from downtown, it's not great. I would agree with that. It's a one-way street situation and everything.
And a hill.
And the hill. Putting aside the hill. I was thinking like my eye doctor is out on, where's the new department of the UDOT? I can't ever remember the name of this road. Like Woodlands Village. Woodlands Village. It's there. It's just,
Oh, there's
no bike lane construction, it's high speeds and I'm on the sidewalk the whole time. But that, you know, thinking about where medical facilities are located, if you're asking people to walk or bike or take the bus to medical care.
Plus, yeah, hospitals employ a lot of.
Exactly, right?
Do we know, like in the case of the hospital, if they were locating someplace, would they likely need to get regional plan amendment to locate somewhere? Because if there is a regional plan amendment, I think how some of those networks function and see if given that location, the current plan network is adequate to that location or not. May not be a good answer to discussion on there. Though, because it's kind of leaving a lot to the future. And that, could that be addressed in the text now that something like that moves, it really changes everybody's assumptions about what went into the plan in terms of multimodal networks, even our road networks for that matter.
So even if it moved into a spot identified as employment.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, probably wouldn't now, but. The last hospital needed one because it increased the scale of the activity center. Basically, it was
But it's not a given that I would need one.
not if it's already employment district. Or
Right.
research district, whatever, it's.
Like the Portugal land and employment district.
on this map, it is an employment district, but the definition of an employment district does not mention medical. And it says employment districts are office parks, light and heavy industrial uses, and mixed use business parks. And then the University and Research District does specifically mention medical. Yeah. Employment district, oh wait, they have many features of employment districts, but are usually anchored by institutional, medical, or military use. That one actually calls out medical. But yeah, the whole area of Belmont is unemployment, or sorry, a research district.
And that wasn't employment before the hospital started evaluating it. It was future suburban. The hospital changed it to employment and increased to the size of the activity center from neighborhood to regional scale.
I guess with this land use map now make it easier for the hospital to come in. That's how I'm interpreting it. It's
not.
or
Elsewhere.
current land, they still own that land. They still could build there and go through the process again. I would argue this makes it easier.
But the regional plan part of it passed. Because they separated that out. So that happened already in the whole plan too. The rezoning failed. Work on it.
Just-
But
We might all be on the same page about this, but currently the hospital is a center. So it's the current location on the map, so it's not to say that center couldn't be a location for the hospital too.
Oh, right, okay.
Wait, sorry, an employment center?
No, it's an urban center.
Urban center, okay.
On the place where it currently is designated as an urban center. So Sarah may have had a different approach to this that I wasn't aware of, but I don't believe in creating this map. We were looking at a specific future place for the hospital and saying, we're making this for the hospital.
Right, nor is that your job, but if there's places that we don't want the hospital to exist, can we angle? Or just maybe we specifically say that it needs to be called that. Like just maybe hospital gets a specific mention versus other medical. It's gonna come.
Yeah.
It's all I'm thinking. It's gonna come up and let's make sure we got our ducks in a row.
Could something be referenced just to large employers? Some language about making sure that we have adequate transportation facilities to when large employers go someplace, because they kind of change the gravity with nobody targeted for that.
It's hard, like currently our large employers, like public transit, like Gore and Purina, they have bad public transit access.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think that'll ever change unless. I don't know.
There's lots of people try to bike to go over and Green Mountain.
Yeah, I guess biking is easier, yeah.
That's fun.
that Route 8, I'm telling you, about 3-minute frequencies.
Still probably like over a mile to Gore, I think.
So you said, yeah, take it just a little further and then 3-minute frequencies.
Solved.
And I can hop on along the way.
Well, it is 6, and it's my dad's birthday, so I
Oh,
almost have this meeting. But
Before we have this meeting.
he's also a cyclist, in case you all wanted to. So, I'll appreciate this. So for next steps, what are our options as a committee?
Does somebody have a calendar that shows what December looks like? The next transportation commission meeting is in December.
Yeah, I think it's the 4th,
Okay, and when's our next meeting is in the
the
5th.
5th. Let me just check that, but I believe so.
That gives you
Because I, that's why I don't mind.
We're gonna fix it.
I'm pretty sure, because I think I put them both on my
Because
calendar.
it's desired that what this group recommends goes to Transportation Commission. So I have a lot of pages of notes. I think we can summarize it into a handful of bullet points, but you all should see it again before we kind of finalize it. But you won't have an opportunity that goes to the Transportation Commission. You won't have an opportunity to see it before it should go to Transportation Commission.
Can we vote on a draft over email, or do we have to meet to vote on a draft?
Yeah, you really do.
Or just do like a quick, like Zoom or Google. And look at it and I'll vote on it.
You could do that. We could do like a virtual meeting prior to December 4th.
We can check the vote on the draft minutes.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yes, when would you need it to happen then? Ideally, like to get it to the Transportation Commission, when's the absolute last day we could?
Yeah, we were talking about getting, because it's the week after next.
Yep.
Next week is a half a week.
Yep.
So they were talking about getting something out on Wednesday.
To the Transportation Commission, to be clear, or to us.
To the Transportation Commission.
Got it. So we would need to have finalized it before 27th.
Yeah, I could check if there's any flexibility in the schedule. We'll have to have a date to send it out, give time for review, and then have people have a date to have a quick vote on it, right?
Yes.
Just gonna happen before next Wednesday.
That seems very unlikely.
Could we just as a committee send our own letter?
Yes. and I
Or
think
why does the Transportation Commission need to be involved?
if it's like an official kind of set of comments from like advisory committee, it's desired that it is run through that before it goes.
Even when we don't have time.
So they need to review our comments.
How important is that? Like, could we all just independently sign our names and not be the BAC?
Yes, you could, I mean, you all have the list of comments, you could easily send those in.
Will they receive the same amount of weight? Yeah.
That also too, or that? A weighted average,
I
like
mean,
this guy looks like +5.
Hey, Martin, I know you're super busy, but when do you think you can get a draft together? By Monday of next week, or?
I think you,
Yeah.
no,
It took like 5 pages of notes. I was gonna share them with you. That might
I
help.
think, Chris was taking notes, I think probably between the four of us, like four of us, including Sam, I bet we could knock it out pretty quickly.
Look at them. Beautiful.
I will review it right away.
It's like,
Everything we're done.
I mean, anything I said isn't in here.
We plug it into AI and have it like put together.
Yeah, probably.
If we got something out by the end of the week, just a summary of what our notes were.
We can vote by Monday. Yeah.
You can vote by early next week, and it can go to the Transportation Commission the week after. Is that a possibility?
Sure.
Am I being
Yeah.
ambitious?
No. What do you want from, I can sort of organize my notes as best I can and then share them with you.
Yeah.
I trust your note taking. I would just go for it.
I can share them with you and then you can compare them to yours and Chris's and we could put something together.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, when you want them.
Anytime this week.
And then we need a little half an hour for us to just approve. Minutes.
Either Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
Yeah, like a 5-minute long meeting.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
quick,
Because we have to make it an official meeting.
virtual only.
It's a good week for me next week. I'm like literally have a bunch of availability, so just let me know. Just in the office working.
In cranberry.
Yeah, I'm available on Thursday. Just let me know.
Tuesday's a little bit better.
Thinking like, I have a little noon, lunchtime, boom, knock it out.
Guys, what works for you?
Oh, wait, I'm actually busy. On the
Killing me.
Tuesday. Or if it's okay, well, yeah, I can actually do that one.
I mean, all we're doing is is voting on approving the minutes, right?
Yeah. Martin, if I get them to you by, let's just say Thursday evening, you could send them out to people so they can look over the.
We're just gonna look at your notes and then see if, compare it to ours and see if there's any.
How fast are you gonna process this recording in case there's a reference that I said that I didn't type?
I can do it tomorrow.
Awesome.
Did you remember to record it?
Yes.
I was there for that.
I said to record it, so we're good.
There's a transcript too, if you want.
That's what I was, yeah. That's what I
The
was gonna
transcript.
use. Yep.
Tuesday? Let's not do Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's gonna start to interfere with plans. So let's say noon or 4:30 would be our two options.
Like at 12:30.
Not problematic, right?
I think that can be done. Let me just check.
And do you want these in the form of, like the meeting minutes, like the regular meeting minutes?
Sure.
Okay. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay, cool.
Send us your notes, we'll put them into
You
that.
got it. Is there any further discussion? We have to talk about anything else?
No, go see your dad.
Cool, okay, I will conclude this thing. What we're gonna do. So you can stop recording. Do you want me to try to format them at all, Martin? Because right now it's just the right height. Okay.
I wouldn't worry about that. Really. Much as you want to do, but
Plus, there's a bunch of comments that I made before. I'll just, yeah, I'll type on them.
Thanks, officer.
Thank you so much for the helpful legal definitions.
I mean, probably the most helpful thing would be make sure they're complete thoughts. I don't know if you want.
Right now, there's verbatim, like it's close to verbatim. It's like, yeah, so I can synthesize them.
Like a generalized subject verb structure.
Express or something?
I'll edit them. Like, now. I think we're not going to read your notes. Verbatim. I mean, they're not that verbatim.
I think it's
Supposed to
hospital.
like, yeah. I think of myself.
Probably.
Thank you guys for being super motivated.
Really good comment. Individual comments.
Sounds like we're.
Doing more, yeah.
I just feel like it's nice to get stuff in front of the Transportation Commission to be like, hey, guys, remember this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember how we meet after you and so you never hear what we have to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that kind of needs to
What
be.
do you say?
Let's fix that. Because before I joined the BAC, I never had strong opinions on population density and zoning, and now I have to learn about this.
Martin, I forgot to tell you, I went to Tucson a couple weeks ago and I went past that Toucan intersection that you talked about. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
hey, this is not bad.
You
Not the
can,
worst. Yeah,
you'll come around to that
I'll
side.
come around.
Nice, Donna.
And also they have some like nice intersections now.
I think the other
Or
one,
like
we're
the
gonna see
bike
like a
lanes.
bike hawk, yeah.
Yeah, a bike
Like
hawk.
a green.
Yep.
So there's like
On a
a,
bike lane.
accessible push button. So
Exactly,
you're not kind of
that's the one
hanging
I
out.
went
there.
through, that's like, I can't remember where it was,
Yeah,
somewhere by University and like Stone, somewhere over there. Anyway, but they have this intersection. The bikes get funneled to the center and then there's like